I was in the White House, and I was I was like listening to this debate that the president was talking about. He was talking about how like he was gonna make a deal with like the Ukrainians and the Russians. Like he was gonna be like the mediator in like a peace deal, you know. And so he was telling me about how he was gonna give like a section of Ukraine to the Russians, and for this, basically, the Ukrainians are like trading land for peace, so to end the war. And bro, the Ukrainians, they were like taking this for granted. They were like, bro, that's a bunch of bull crap. We're not gonna give the Russians land for invading our territory. That's a bunch of bull crap. And the president was talking to me about how like if the Ukrainians like refuse to, if like no one accepts this peace deal, you know, like maybe the Russians are like, oh, we don't want a slice of Ukraine, we want the whole thing. And maybe if the Ukrainians are like, bro, we're not going to give them land, we're going to fight to the end, we're not going to give them land because they invaded us, that's putting our weakness on full display. And so the president was like getting advice from me. He was like, oh, Kenny, you're so wise and you're so smart, and you're like the best advisor that the United States or Russia or Ukraine or anyone, you're a better advisor than we've had in America's whole history. And we want to know, what advice do you have about how we can lead the world to peace, so we're not having this war and we don't have these people like refusing to take this peace deal. And I was like, all right. So here it is. Here is like an action plan on like how to create peace despite everyone wanting to go to war. And so I asked the president, I was like, why don't you think the Ukrainians want to take this peace deal? I mean, their people are getting killed. Why don't you think that they want to take this peace deal and sacrifice a bit of land to end the war? And the president was like, oh, you know, it's because of their pride, you know. They think that because the Russians killed their people, there's no way that they can just give them what they want. And I'm like, but what the Russians want is to conquer Ukraine. By accepting this peace deal, they're not letting the Russians conquer Ukraine. They're actually like giving them much less than they actually want. And the president was like, oh, you know, it doesn't matter to the Ukrainians. They don't want to go down without a fight. And I was like, okay, so what about the Russians? And the president was like, oh, you know, Russians think that Ukraine is rightfully theirs, and that by just taking a little slice of Ukraine, they're getting the short end of the stick, you know. They feel like Ukraine's not giving them what's owed to them because they're like, Russia's like this big country and Ukraine is like this small little country that wants independence. Russia just thinks that because they're a big country, that all these other smaller countries gotta like submit to them. And I was like, all right, so it looks like what the Russians want is to feel powerful and feel like oh, all these little countries, they want to like bow down to us, they want to submit to us. And so maybe this doesn't have to end in like Ukraine. And I was talking to the president, and I was like, maybe this doesn't have to end in like Russia taking over Ukraine. Maybe they can get this sense of feeling powerful without having to conquer Ukraine. And the president was like, oh, you're onto something. And I was like, and the president was like, but how can we give Russia this sense of power without them taking over Ukraine? And I was like, that's a very good question. I think that we need to like influence Ukraine propaganda to be more like accommodating to the Russians, and so they have this sense of power without having to take over Ukraine. And the president was like, oh, okay, that sounds like a good idea. What do you recommend? And I was like, all right, we need to get a team on Ukraine propaganda, and we need to like basically like tell them to push an idea that the Russians want to hear, you know, that they're powerful. Oh, they got armies, they got money, they got economy, powerful, strong economies, and that by conquering Ukraine, they're actually denying their power. You know, they think that they need to have Ukraine to be powerful, but they are already powerful as they are. For the reasons I said, they got land, they got money, they got armies. They're already powerful, and they don't need Ukraine. And bro, 1 month later, there was peace. Peace! And it's because of my leadership. You know, I got a team on the propaganda at Ukraine. They were talking about how Russia is like, basically it gave Russia like this sense of power. And like once Russia had this sense of power, they felt like, all right, Ukraine's a little country, their armies are weak. What do they have to offer us? We're already such a powerful nation. We don't need them. And bro, this created peace in the Russia-Ukraine war. And so boys, y'all need to learn from this experience that I had creating peace in the Russia-Ukraine war. And what you got to do, you got to give your enemies a sense of power. And I know what you're thinking. Why do I gotta give my enemies a sense of power? I wanna belittle them and demean them so they know that they can't push me around. But boys, learn from the Russia-Ukraine war. It's because Russia, even though Russia is like a big enemy to Ukraine, because the Ukrainians gave Russia a sense of power, they didn't feel like they needed to conquer Ukraine in order to have that sense of power. They already had everything that they needed. And so boys, you could be the ultimate peacemaker if you apply what you learned from this video about giving your enemies a sense of importance and a sense of power, and they will not come after you. And that is all I got for the video. Goodbye.